It was just another Wednesday evening in my small townhouse. I began my customary routine, a series of events as predictable as the setting sun. You see, I'm a creature of habit. I guess we all are in our own ways. Coming home from work was like clockwork, the same worn path from the office to my front door. I'd toss my keys on the coffee table, kick off my shoes, and allow the day's stress to melt away. There's an odd comfort in the familiar, in the repetition of day-to-day life. The world outside could be in chaos, but inside my little home, everything was in its place. Everything was as it should be. I'd make myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just something to fill the stomach. Maybe some leftover spaghetti or a sandwich, something quick and easy. The drone of the television would fill the room, the nightly news or some sitcom rerun serving as my only companions in the quiet house. Living alone, you get used to the silence, the empty spaces. It wasn't loneliness per se, just solitude. The dishes would be washed and put away, the leftovers stored in the fridge. I'd settle down on the couch, remote in hand, flicking through channels mindlessly. Outside, the world would be shrouded in darkness, the only light seeping in from the muted glow of the street lamps. But inside, it was warm, cozy, safe. I'd often lose track of time, the hours blending into one another, the evening stretching into the night. The television would be a steady hum in the background, a comforting, constant presence. And amidst this normalcy, this routine, I'd feel a sense of peace, a sense of control. There was nothing to fear, nothing to worry about. I was home in my sanctuary, away from the world and its problems. It was just another ordinary night, just another Wednesday evening in my small townhouse. I remember thinking to myself, what could possibly go wrong tonight? Just as I was about to fall asleep, the whole house went pitch black. I'm not talking about a gentle fading of lights or a flicker before they die out. No, it was as if someone had snatched away the light, leaving nothing but an impenetrable darkness in its place. I was lying there, eyes wide open, staring at the black void that was once my room. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, the rhythm echoing in the silence. I could feel a cold shiver trickle down my spine, my mind filled with thoughts of every horror movie I ever watched. I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just a power cut. Happens to the best of us, right? So I decided to get up and find a flashlight. But the darkness was so thick it felt like I was wading through a sea of ink. I tried to remember where I'd left the flashlight, but my mind was a scrambled mess. I reached for my phone, thinking I could use its light. But when I pressed the power button, nothing happened. I pressed it again, harder this time, but still nothing. It was as dead as the lights in the house. Now that was a bit weird because I charged it just before going to bed. The silence in the house was deafening. The only sound was the pounding of my heart and the blood rushing in my ears. The feeling of isolation pressed down on me, a heavy weight I couldn't shrug off. I was alone in the dark with no way to call for help. Then from far away I heard it. A faint scratching sound. It was barely audible, like the scuttling of a rat. But it wasn't coming from the walls. No, it was coming from below my feet. It was coming from the basement. In the darkness, I could hear a faint scratching sound coming from the basement. I stood at the top of the stairs, staring down into the inky blackness of the basement, the kind of darkness that seems to swallow the light whole, leaving nothing but a void of uncertainty. I could feel a cold chill creeping up the stairs, wrapping around me like a snake. It was a cold that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. It was a cold that seemed to seep out from the very walls of the basement, a cold that felt wrong. The silence was broken by an eerie noise, a muffled scuttling sound, like a rat dragging something heavy. I strained my ears, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. The noise seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. It was a sound that had no place in the normalcy of my home, a sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I've never been one to be scared of my own home, but something about that basement always set me on edge. It wasn't just the darkness or the cold. It was the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows, waiting. Now here's the kicker. The basement door was slightly ajar. I always, and I mean always, keep that door locked. Not just closed, but locked. It was an old habit, one that I picked up when I first moved into this house. But there it was. The door, slightly open, an invitation to the unknown. My mind raced with 1,000 questions. Did I forget to lock it? Was there someone in the house? But the scariest question of all was, what was making that noise? With a shaky hand, I reached out towards the door. The wood was cold under my touch, colder than it should have been. I could feel the fear gnawing at me, but I had to know. I had to see what was in the basement. As I reached out to push the door open, I heard a low growl from the darkness. I stood frozen, every instinct screaming at me to run, but I could not. There was something in the basement, something unseen, something unexplainable. Fear prickled at my skin, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. I could feel it, an unseen presence, a lurking dread, its icy tendrils wrapping around my heart, squeezing the warmth out of me. It was as if the very air had turned against me, the temperature dropping so abruptly that I could see my breath misting in front of my face. There was something else too, an eerie quietness, a silence that was so profound it felt like a living thing, a creature of the night that had swallowed the basement whole. Yet in the midst of that silence I could hear whispers. They were so faint, so distant, like the rustling of autumn leaves or the hushed murmur of a far-off stream. I strained my ears, trying to make out what they were saying, but their words remained elusive, slipping away like shadows in the night. The whispers grew louder, more insistent. It was as if they were trying to tell me something important, but no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't understand them. They were just noise, a cacophony of sound that made no sense. And the more I tried to understand, the more confused I became, until I felt like I was drowning in a sea of unknown voices. The presence was stronger now, more palpable. I could feel its gaze on me, a weight that was almost physical. It was watching me, observing me, its unseen eyes boring into me. I was an intruder, a trespasser in its domain, and it did not like it. I could feel its anger, its resentment radiating off it in waves. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated terror, of fear so deep and so primal that it threatened to consume me. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. I stood there, in the silence, waiting for something, anything to happen. It was an eerie stillness, the kind that sends chills down your spine and makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, like a drummer keeping rhythm to a song only I could hear. The darkness was so thick it felt like a heavy blanket, smothering me, squeezing the breath out of me. I had to do something, anything but just stand there, frozen in fear. So, I mustered up the courage, took a deep breath, and began to descend the stairs. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing through the silent house, sounding louder than a gunshot in the stillness. When I finally reached the bottom, I looked around. It was just an ordinary basement, filled with boxes of forgotten memories and dust-covered furniture. Nothing was out of place. Nothing was amiss. It was just normal. Then, as if on cue, the lights flickered back on, and the house was flooded with light. I blinked, momentarily blinded by the sudden brightness. The silence was broken by the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a car passing by outside. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. It was working again. I let out a sigh of relief, my heartbeat slowly returning to normal. It was over, I thought. Just a power outage, just a creepy, unexplainable event in an otherwise ordinary night. But as I turned to leave the basement, I saw something out of the corner of my eye that made my blood run cold.